Hey everyone, my name is Vishwas, and in this video, we will build an event launch page using Next.js App Router, TypeScript, and Tailwind CSS. I am part of the team at Builder.io, a company some of you might be aware of. We are getting ready for an AI launch event, and the event registration experience we have built is one of the best I've seen in a really long time. It has a grid pattern background, a rotating icon animation, an animated countdown timer, and a brand color that continuously updates based on the framework or technology in view. But the highlight, you can drag elements on the screen, rearranging the user interface. Each time you make a change, the corresponding layout code auto-generates in the code block below. Enter your email, to claim your ticket, customize it, and share it on social media for a chance to win some exclusive builder swag. Pause the video to visit velocity.builder.io, claim and share your ticket on social media. I promise you, it's a quick 30-second process. The entire site is built with Quick, which is a fantastic framework to work with. However, knowing that many of you on this channel are React and Next.js enthusiasts, I thought it would be helpful to recreate this in Next.js. We will use Next.js App Router, TypeScript, and Tailwind CSS. This tutorial is just part 1 of building the event launch page. I will have some questions for you at the end of this video about Next.js and future content on the channel, so please share your thoughts in the comment section. The best way to learn is by doing. So if your editor is ready, let's dive in. In VS Code, in the terminal, I have navigated to a folder called Next.js Event Launch. Here, run the command npx create next app followed by a dot. This will create a new Next.js app within the same directory. Opt for TypeScript, ESLint, Tailwind, the source folder, App Router, and no customization of the default import alias. The command will take a few seconds to scaffold the project. Once done, run npm run dev to kickstart the dev server and head to localhost port 3000 to view the application. Now, let's begin by simplifying the starter project. In tailwind.config.ts, modify extend to be an empty object. Next, in the globals.css file, retain the Tailwind inclusion and replace the remaining content with styles for the body tag. We will reset padding, margin, and set the font color to white. In layout.tsx, update the title to builder.io, velocity, and the description to AI launch event. Lastly, in page.tsx, replace all code with just a main tag. Now, our app should display a blank white background. Let's proceed. Revisiting velocity.builder.io, the first thing you'll notice is the background. It seems simple, but consists of 5 distinct elements: a black colored shade, a grid of tiny squares, a gradient that lightens at the top and darkens radially, a subtle background color that shifts with the framework or technology, and on page load, a black overlay that fades, revealing the content. We will recreate each element step by step. First up, the square grid. We will use a few assets that are hosted on Builder's CDN, as it simplifies the whole process of working with assets. We will store all our asset URLs in an asset utils file. Inside the source folder, create a new folder named Utils. Within this folder, create an assetutils.ts file. Here, I will paste the list of assets we will be using, starting with the square asset for the grid. You can see it's a simple black box with a transparent border on the right and to the bottom. Back in page.tsx, within the main tag, insert a div tag. This div tag should span the entire screen. So we will use a fixed position with inset 0. These are Tailwind CSS classes. We will also add an opacity 30 to tone down the grid. Next, we will specify a background image and size using the style attribute, as Tailwind doesn't offer specific classes for this. So background image is a URL, and this is going to be equal to assets dot square. Make sure to import assets from utils/assetutils file. The background size we restrict to 30 pixels. We can also change this to a self-closing div tag. Save the file, and you will see our grid set against a white backdrop. Next, we will layer in the gradient using another asset URL called gradient. It's an image where we have transparency at the top, becoming opaque radially outward. In page.tsx, at the top, import image from next/image. Above the previously added div tag, invoke the image component. Set its width, height, role is equal to presentation for visual purposes, an alt attribute, Tailwind CSS classes to ensure it spans the entire screen. So fixed, inset 0, width screen, height screen, object cover, and finally the source. This is going to be equal to assets.gradient. When adding the source, Next.js might flag an error about the hostname configuration. To resolve this, open next.config.js and add a new config for images, specifying the domain as cdn.builder.io. Save the file and restart the browser if you have to. If you encounter an error about broken SVGs, add another line to the image config to allow SVGs. Dangerously allow SVG set to true. Save again, refresh the browser, and you should see the grid with a gradient that seems to emanate light from the top, fading out as it descends. Our next task is to introduce a background color visible within the grid lines. This requires a bit more coding. Let's begin by creating another utility file named framework utils.ts. Here, we will define a new array of frameworks and other technologies like Chrome, Safari, etc. Specifying as const is important for TypeScript. Next, export a type named framework representing one of the array elements. So type of frameworks of number. Hover over framework and you can see the possible values. Now we will cycle through this array every 2 seconds, updating the background color based on the framework's theme color. In page.tsx, import the framework type and array. Also import useState and useEffect to track the current framework in the cycle and set an interval to rotate through the frameworks. Within the home component, invoke useState, current framework, set current framework, and the initial value is the first framework in the array, which is React. When you save the file, Next.js will complain that the component uses state and should be a client component. I am assuming you know the difference between client and server components. If you don't, let me know in the comment section if a video on the same topic would be helpful. But the fix for this is to simply include the use client directive at the top. Next, within the home component, invoke useEffect. We pass in a callback function and an empty dependency array. Within the callback, start with an array index of 0. Next, define a function named rotateFrameworks. Set the initial value to the frameworks of current index. And in the next line, increment the current index. So current index is equal to current index plus 1 modulus frameworks.length. We do have a type error. So after useState, specify the type as framework. Call setInterval, passing in rotateFrameworks with a duration of 2 seconds. Lastly, return a function to clear the interval when the component unmounts. So const interval id is equal to setInterval, and we return a function where we call clear interval, passing in interval id. With the frameworks changing every 2 seconds, let's now add a div tag whose background color updates based on the current framework. Again, we will use a fixed position with inset0, a transition for the color property, a delay, a duration, and an opacity. But the question is, how do we conditionally apply a class based on the current framework? We will need a utility class. Let's create a Tailwind utility function to conditionally apply and merge class names. In a new terminal, within the same project folder, run the command npm install clsx and tailwind-merge. These packages facilitate working with conditional class names and merging Tailwind classes seamlessly. In the utils folder, create a file named tailwindutils.ts. Here, import type class value, from CLSX, and import twmerge from Tailwind merge. Export a function called cn that accepts a list of classes of type class value array and returns a single string. For the function body, we return Tailwind merge, passing in CLSX, passing in the list of classes. Really simple. Now in page.tsx, let's update the div tag. At the top, import cn from Tailwind utils, and the class name now is a function. We call cn, passing in the list of class names as is. Then, as a second argument, we conditionally specify the classes to apply based on the current framework. I will paste the code to save us some time. For each framework, we have a corresponding Tailwind CSS background class. Save the file, and you will observe the color of the grid lines shifting every 2 seconds as we cycle through the framework array. To enhance this effect, change the background color from white to black. In globals.css file, simply adjust the background color of the body to 111. Save the file, and you will see a black backdrop with a more subdued grid. Our UI is gradually coming together. For our final visual touch, let's incorporate a reveal effect. In page.tsx, add a new state variable named showBackground with an initial value of false, meaning all the UI we have created will initially be hidden. Then add a use effect that only runs on mount. Here, set showBackground to true. Now, using the showBackground state, we will adjust the opacity of a black layer div element from 100 to 0. So all the way at the bottom, insert a div tag. For the class name, use the cn utility function. Set the background color to black. Use a fixed position and stretch it across the screen with inset 0. Add a transition property for opacity and a duration of 1500 milliseconds. As a second argument, we will use conditional class names. If we should not show the background, make it opaque with opacity 100. If we should show the background, make it transparent with opacity 0. If we save the file and refresh the browser, we should start with a black background and then reveal the different layers. With the background in place, let's shift our attention to the overlay content. The text Figma to framework will never be the same, the subtitle, and the countdown timer. Let's begin by updating the font from Inter to Poppins, which is the font on the live site. In layout.tsx, remove the Inter font. Then in page.tsx, import Poppins from next/font/Google. And for Poppins, we need to specify the font weight, which in our case is 700. So weight 700. And we also need to specify subsets, which is an array. And we specify Latin. For our next step, let's start with the heading without any framework or color transitions. We begin with a div tag to center the content on the page and set a maximum width. So max width, 7 XL, some top margin, and horizontally center the content. Inside this div, we create another div to stack child elements vertically and center them horizontally. So class name is equal to flex column, items center, and we also ensure the stacking context is correct, placing the content above other layers. So relative position with a z index 10. Inside this div tag, we add an h1 tag for our main heading. The text should be large, so 7 XL, have a max width of 3 pixels, centered, and have a snug line height. We also add a bottom margin to separate it from the next element, which we will add shortly. We will also apply the newly added Poppins font. Since we are working with backticks, we can use $curly braces, poppins.classname. Within the heading, we start with the Figma logo followed by the text. So for the logo, we use the image component. Alt is equal to Figma logo, class name, inline block, some margin to the right, and negative margin to the top. We're going to set source to assets.figma, which is present in our assets utils file. We set width and height to 50. The image is followed by the text. Figma to framework will never be the same again. We will animate the color of the word never, so we wrap it in a span tag. After saving the file, you should see the heading displayed. The font is a little too large, so let's change it to 5 pixels. Alright, there are 2 tasks remaining for this h1 tag. First, to cycle through the frameworks, and second, to animate the text color of the word never. Let's tackle the framework rotation first. Within the source folder, create a new folder called Components. Inside this folder, create a file called frameworkrotation.tsx. Within the file, define a React component and export it. For the JSX, we will carefully apply Tailwind classes to ensure the framework logos are positioned correctly. So we return a div tag and specify its class name. We set both width and height to 80 pixels. Add a horizontal margin and a negative top margin. We align it to the middle and make it inline flex. Finally, we set its position to relative. Now, let's implement the actual framework rotation logic. Start by importing the necessary components and utilities at the top. The image component from Next.image, the array of assets from asset utils, the framework type and array of frameworks from framework utils, and the class name utility function for conditionally applying classes from Tailwind utils. Next, we specify a current framework prop for the component of type framework, which refers to the current framework being cycled through in page.tsx file. Inside the div tag, we iterate over the array of frameworks using frameworks.map. And for each framework, we render its logo as an image. We set the key to the framework's name, the source to the corresponding asset, and specify dimensions and classes for the rotation animation. Width and height of 80, and for class name, we use the cn function. As the first argument, width full, height full, object contain, object center, absolute position, top 0, left 0, transition all, with a duration of 300 milliseconds. And for the second argument, if current framework is equal to the framework in rotation, we set its opacity to 100 without any transformation. However, if the framework in the array appears before the current framework, we set opacity to 0 and a negative translate in the y direction. If the condition is opposite, we set opacity to 0 with a positive translation in the y direction. We do have an error as I have misspelled the prop name. Now I will tell you the logic for this animation or transition can be refined further, so please feel free to experiment. Back in page.tsx, replace the word framework with the component framework rotation. Make sure to import it at the top from components/framework rotation and specify the current framework prop, which is equal to the current framework state variable within page.tsx. After saving the file, you should see the framework rotating animation in action, each framework having a theme color reflected in the background. Now, let's update the classes for the word never to match the font color. So class name is equal to the function cn, and apply a transition to the colors property with a 200 millisecond duration. So transition -colors, duration -200. We then conditionally apply the text color based on the current framework. So as the second argument, we have an object, and we copy paste the code from above for the background color and change all occurrences of BG to text. After saving the file, you will see the text color change in sync with the framework's theme color. The next step involves adding simple text with logos for Builder and Figma. It is straightforward, so I will paste the code and explain it. After the h1 tag, we paste a paragraph tag. The paragraph tag has a bottom margin, and inside we have a span tag with the text "Join us for an AI launch event by," followed by 2 images, the Builder logo and the Figma logo. Both logos have specified dimensions and spacing. You can see the paragraph on the right-hand side being displayed as expected. Nothing too complex, I hope. Next, we'll add a simple claim ticket button. So after the paragraph tag, a div tag with a bottom margin and a button inside with the text claim ticket. For the button classes, we use the cn utility function, as the button's background color should change based on the current framework. For the static classes, let's set black color, padding in the horizontal and vertical directions, rounded corners, small text, semi-bold font, and we add transition for colors with a duration of 200 milliseconds. We then copy-paste the background color logic from above. So the entire object, copy, and as the second argument to the class name function, paste it. After saving, you will see a button whose background color matches the current framework theme. For our final step, we will implement the countdown timer. This involves several components, so we will address them sequentially. First, let's create a utility function to calculate the time remaining until the event. So in the utils folder, create a new file named countdownutils.ts. Define a function named calculateTimeToEvent. Inside this function, specify the event date as October 12th, 2023 at 9 a.m. Pacific time. You can make this event date more flexible by accepting it as a parameter. Once we have the event date, get hold of the current date and compute the time difference between the event date and the current date. So time remaining is equal to event date dot get time minus current date dot get time. Using this difference, extract the number of days, hours, minutes, and seconds. This is a standard math formula, so I'm going to paste the code. We have our days, hours, minutes, and seconds, which we are going to return from the function as an object. Now, let's create a component that uses this function. In the components folder, create a new file named countdowntimer.tsx. Here, start with the necessary imports. We require calculate time to event function, which we just defined. The framework type, since the component needs to know the current framework in rotation. And useState as well as useEffect hooks for an interval that updates every second. Next, let's define the component. The component name is countdowntimer, and this receives the current framework in rotation as a prop. So current framework of type framework. Inside the component, we maintain a state variable to continuously track the time left for the event. Let's call it countdown, set countdown, and the initial value we pass in the calculate time to event function. Make sure to call the function. We then define an effect that updates the countdown state every second. Empty dependency array. Const interval id is equal to set interval, call set countdown, passing in calculate time to event. And the interval is every second. We also return a function to clear the interval. For the JSX, let's define a div tag that returns the days, hours, minutes, and seconds. We will add flex class, a gap of 10 pixels, and center the text. However, to display each of the units, we will create another component. Before that, let's quickly fix calculate time to event, which should start with a lowercase. Now, in the components folder, create a file named timeUnit.tsx. Start by importing the cn utility function, as we will be adding conditional class names. Define a component named timeUnit that accepts 3 props: a label like days, hours, minutes, or seconds, a value, which is the actual number, and the current framework to adjust the label color based on the framework's theme. Label is of type string, value of type number, and current framework of type framework. For the JSX, we display the label below the value. So start with a div tag with flex and flex column classes. Then add 2 div tags. The first one displays the value with a white text color. A font size of 3XL. and a semi-bold font weight. The second div uses the class name function to conditionally set the font color based on the current framework. So class name cn, the static classes text, 8 pixels, font medium. The second argument we've already seen before, so let me paste the code. We have the text color dependent on the current framework. This completes our time unit component. However, we would like to animate the value. So let's create another component for that. In the components folder, create a new file named number rotation.tsx. Here, I'm going to paste the entire component code, as I am pretty sure there are better ways to handle this animation that I can't think of. The component receives the countdown value as a prop called number. We generate an array of length 60 and use the array element value to compare with the passed in countdown value. This determines if the value should exit to the bottom or reset to the top when transitioning from 0 to 59. We have the opacity and translation classes similar to the framework. We've also applied several Tailwind classes to ensure the number renders in the same position while animating. We can now import this component in time unit component and invoke it with value as number prop. Now let's include time unit in the countdown timer component with the right props. Import time unit from time unit. And in the JSX, invoke time unit component, passing in label as days, value is equal to countdown.days, and current framework is equal to current framework. We're going to duplicate this 3 times and change days to hours, minutes, and seconds. Finally, integrate countdown timer in page.tsx. Countdown timer, make sure to import it at the top. We pass in the current framework prop. If we save the file, our event launch page should work as expected. We have the countdown timer ticking every second and the framework rotating every 2 seconds. The background also changes in sync with the framework theme. All right, this wraps up part 1 of building velocity.builder.io. Now I have 2 questions for you. First, do you enjoy content like this video where you build something from scratch? And second, would you be interested in an updated series on Next.js 13? There were numerous requests for React Native, but the viewership just hasn't matched the demand. So if this video gets 5,000 likes, that's a really good sign for me to move Next.js series to the top of my priority list. Please share your answers to both questions in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.